Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio as we continue to celebrate and have conversations about all the amazing people who are working in the trenches to make Mississippi a better place to live, work, and play. Man, it takes a lot of people working together in so many different ways of life and so many different trenches to make this place a better place. One conversation that I have been really looking forward to having is the state auditor, Shad White. I've really been looking forward to having a long conversation. We finally were able to get him onto the schedule. I have him for the whole show today, so we're going to cover a wide variety of issues. And so no big speeches to start the show because we got a lot to talk about. Without any further ado, let me welcome Shad White back to the Ricky Matthews Show. How you doing, Shad?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me, and excited to chat a little bit.
So you're the 42nd state auditor. I still think you're the youngest auditor in the United States. Is that correct?
I think so. I think I'm holding on to the title, but it could change any day. But for right now, I'm holding on to it.
I'm assuming you're still in your 30s, right?
I'm 38. Yeah.
38. So that's great. Listen, I was talking to a leader in the Republican Party not long ago, and he was saying to me that he's not looking forward to the future, and he means that actually in a good way. Because this is what he said. He said the bench in the Republican Party is so strong. There's so many worthy candidates that are coming up through the bench. It will be a very dynamic next few years in Mississippi politics, won't it, Shad?
I think that's right. It's a good thing in a sense because Mississippi has, especially in the last, I'd say 15 years, really grown as a conservative state. When I was growing up, you still had folks who would vote in the Democratic primary. A lot of local elected officials were Democrats. But now I think President Obama followed by President Trump, I think that really solidified a shift of most normal middle class and working class Mississippians over to the Republican Party. And so for that reason, you get a lot of candidates who are at least putting the word Republican by their name when they're running on a ballot. And so that's a blessing in a sense that there are a lot of conservatives in Mississippi. It means that the future elections are going to be tense. They're going to be tense as candidates work to persuade the voters and persuade conservatives that they have the correct vision for the future of the state and try to get their votes.
Yeah, the Republican primaries for the next several years most likely will be, especially on the statewide level, will be very, very dynamic. And of course, and then Republican leaders, they look at that and say, gosh, I hate it when good candidates are beating each other's brains out. But hopefully it won't be dirty politics. Hopefully it'll be around the issues, around the policies. But it's a different world. I was chatting with you before we started the show that, I came 42 years in media, 16 years as CEO of media companies, responsibilities for media companies and newspapers across 5 states. I've seen a lot. I saw the whole evolution of the internet and then social media. Was involved in pure play digital media companies later in my career. I can't imagine, because I have been targets many times. I know what that looks like. I know what it feels like. And thank God that the moat for me was always my family. I could always come back, and I never had a loss in value about what was important to me. My family was the thing that kept me grounded through the process. But to be an elected official in this day and time, first of all, it can be brutal. You got to have thick skin. But if you don't have the goal in mind, clearly in mind, it can make you wonder about whether you made the right decision to be in politics. What's your thought about that?
Yeah, I do think that is one of the biggest challenges of being in politics, and any young person who's thinking about doing what I do, running for office, they should be aware of that before they go in, that you're going to get called all kinds of names. You're going to get labeled. People are going to say, they're going to talk about you. They're going to have no idea what they're talking about, but they're just going to throw out accusations because it's fun to do that on the internet. This is the thing that I have found for candidates who have a thick skin and are willing to stick it out, who know why they're in elected office, who want to achieve something specific. it's actually pretty easy to just blaze ahead and say, you know what, I'm going on Twitter. I'm telling people what I think. I'm telling folks about this policy. I'm going to advocate for this position that my office has taken, and to just sort of ignore all of the folks who are going to criticize you. And that's the boat that I find myself in. I'm motivated by a vision for the future of the state and what we're doing in the auditor's office. And so it really doesn't bother me too much to hear or see people say stuff like that on social media. There is another kind of candidate, and I've noticed this, for people who don't have a thick enough skin, they tend to retract from social media and they'll let staff handle it, or they'll just not post on social media at all. They'll shy away from interviews. And look, you have that choice to make if you're an elected official, but you're not going to be as effective. And so I think for modern politics, if you're going into this, you need to be willing to engage. You need to know why you're doing it, and you need to have a thick skin.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I've been through the whole metamorphosis of the of digital media and the commenting side of that. I mean, there was a time when newspaper companies were trying to literally moderate comments. You know, we paid tremendous amount of dollars locally and then ultimately through services to help sort of moderate the conversations. There ain't no such thing as moderating conversations anymore. And the reality is you get to see it the way it is. Now, some people are politically motivated. Some people are acting on half truths. Some are acting on no truths. In order to sort of take all that in and read it and not be offended by it, the thing that keeps you not being offended by it is, first of all, it has to be a character trait that says, I'm not going to let those things bother me. That's the thick skin part of it. But it is the other thing that is saying, I feel so strongly about what I'm trying to accomplish. And now you can say that as a state auditor. I could say that as a digital media company head or a newspaper publisher. I feel so strongly about that. Faced that a lot after Hurricane Katrina, incidentally. That it didn't bother me. I just said, you know, people will come around. It actually helped me to read and to sort of distill what I was hearing. And I felt like I was a better publisher because we listened to that input. And that's essentially what you were saying as well.
That's right. And, you know, I count myself lucky because I had experiences growing up where I helped build the thick skin. So my dad was an oil field pumper. Grandfather was an oil field pumper. If you've ever been around oil field pumpers, they tend to not care what other people think. You better know what you're talking about, and you better tell the truth. And so also, in addition to that, my dad was a local elected official in a town of 700 people. And, you know, I saw folks get mad at my dad over their water bill and say, you know, you need to waive this water bill because I'm not paying it. And folks want special privileges from the town, and dad say no, and they get mad at them. I mean, I've seen all of that growing up my entire life. And so I knew that going into this job, there was going to be a lot of that. And then on top of it, I'm very lucky. I got to grow up in Mississippi, but I got to go off for law school, and I was a conservative at Harvard Law School. There wasn't a ton of us up there, and so my political views were incredibly unpopular at law school. So I learned to defend those views, and even when folks, you know, said nasty things about me or wrote hate mail to the dean of the Harvard Law School about me, which happened, you know, I just knew that I was saying what I believed. I knew what I was talking about. I researched it. I had a well-grounded opinion, and I was just going to keep going ahead. Be respectful of that other person that you're talking to, but I was going to keep going ahead. And because of those early experiences, I think that really helped prepare me for this job, not only in politics, but being state auditor. I mean, being state auditor specifically is a difficult job if you're not willing to take a little heat. My friend John Dougal, who's the state auditor of Utah, told me when I first got this job, he said, you know, being state auditor requires you to be the skunk in the room sometimes. And he's 100% right. If you're gonna give bad news to people about how money has been stolen or misspent, you're going to have to be willing to take some heat for it. But you got to do your work. You got to know what you're talking about. You got to be airtight on your cases. And then you got to have the courage of your convictions when you start talking about it.
That's the way I approach my shows. It's exactly the same way. And I think it's really, really important, especially when you get involved in an issue, and you got to be willing to take the heat. You know, it's interesting. I remember from our last conversation my read on you going to University of Mississippi and then the University of Oxford and the Rhodes Scholar part and the Harvard Law, coming from a town of I think 731 people. I remember something like that. Right. What was interesting about those conversations to me is I never saw that as a problem for you. I saw it as it gives you perspective. And it's, here's the thing. I talk to successful people, whether it be politics or entrepreneurs, CEOs of companies, anyone who's had the opportunity to spend time outside the state of Mississippi. They shared with us, who did that as well, a burden to represent Mississippi, to be sort of an ambassador for Mississippi, to help dispel myths about Mississippi. But at the same time, we learned from them. We learned from those myths that they thought of. And it gave us perspective. Actually, when we come back here after gaining that perspective, it makes us better leaders. When we come back on the other side, one of the things I noted when I kind of went through a long litany of stuff on X, for example, formerly Twitter, is that people tend to still throw that Harvard thing back at you as if that's some kind of a weight that you carry around, instead of something that is giving you a tremendous perspective, as you were just talking about it. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Mississippi State Auditor Shad White. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. We're talking with Mississippi State Auditor Shad White. And when we went to break, we're just talking about, he's got a great education. He was a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford, went to Harvard Law. He was just talking about how he was the only conservative in that setting. I can imagine even then how challenging that might have been. I actually had an opportunity to go to Harvard at one point in my life as well, and decided not to, because I didn't want to be that far away from home. And by the way, when I retired, I got a Harvard fellowship offered to me that would have involved me having to move to Cambridge for a year. You've seen the fellowships there many times, and I would have been involved in digital media and transitions of newspaper conversations. It would have required me to write a book about my experience and all that. And man, I had just jumped out of the frying pan. The last thing I wanted to do is I was looking forward to retirement, is move to Harvard to be involved in a fellowship. But I was privileged that I got that offer, and respectfully declined. And I never looked back, because I wanted to enjoy retirement. And then this show comes along 4 years later, and here I am. But listen, when you read people trying to connect the liberalism of Harvard to you as if you left here and you're not a true conservative, how do you talk about that?
To be honest with you, I hadn't seen people do that. I mean, what I see more frequently is liberals will say, well, you went to Harvard. How do you have all these conservative beliefs? You just were you asleep for 3 years? Like that kind of a comment. That's the most comment. That's the most negative comment that I see or hear about Harvard specifically. And what bothers me about that, it's the same thing that bothered me about it when I was actually up there for law school, is that liberals are so closed-minded, they tend to believe that their views are what we would call axiomatic, that their views are just true. And then if you study hard enough and you think hard enough, that eventually you'll come to realize that they're correct. And what I've tried to tell my liberal friends through the years is, no, your views are not axiomatic. People can have different opinions than you. And in fact, I think you're wrong about just about everything. And so I would apply the same standard to you. I would tell you, maybe you've been in Ivy League schools your entire life. Maybe go out and live a little bit. Maybe go out in the middle of the country and talk to some folks. Maybe go to church every now and then. Like, do some of the things that make most of us, that help build the beliefs that most of us actually have. So really, I don't encounter what you said all that much. But I will say this, whether my background and my education is good for me politically or bad for me politically, frankly, I don't care. I mean, it doesn't matter, because it is just me. It's just who I am. I worked hard. I did these things. And if folks want to vote against me or for me because of that, that's up to them. My biggest concern is waking up every day and doing a good job, telling the truth about what we're doing in the auditor's office, and trying to make the state the best it can possibly be, so that when I'm dead and gone, that my 3 kids inherit a place that is as strong and as prosperous as it can possibly be. That's what I think about every day.
Yeah, well, that's a really great point. And, it's interesting when you get into these discussions about where DEI efforts are in the United States, where woke is in the United States, because it's not typically a political show in that way. But there is a lot of DEI money being spent in universities in Mississippi, and it's a conversation that we're having. But that experience at Harvard actually helps you to some extent have a perspective about that, about why it's important for us to have open minds and not be biased, et cetera. It does inform you in that way, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. And I think, I was at law school in Massachusetts between 2011 and 2014, and I saw the early elements of what has now become the DEI movement across the United States. And it was really disturbing back then. And now you see it, unfortunately, at our Mississippi public universities. So, for example, at my alma mater, Ole Miss, you see DEI programming that is paid for by you and me, the taxpayers of Mississippi, and it'll be learning sessions about Ibram Kendi's work. Ibram Kendi is a guy who has preached that the only remedy to past discrimination is present and future discrimination. They'll talk about Kendi's work where he talks about the evil of whiteness, which is a word that I think he or somebody else made up. I have no idea what it means, but it's meant to attach some guilt or blame to somebody because of the color of their skin. In my view, these views are just racist, but they're being taught at our universities, and they're being pushed by university administrators, some of them, and we're paying for it. We're paying for it because we continue to fund DEI initiatives at Mississippi public universities. Other states have stopped this. So Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, Idaho, several other states, Utah, have banned the use of public dollars on DEI initiatives at their public universities. But Mississippi, unfortunately, has not done that yet. And again, I think about my three kids. I don't want to raise my three kids to believe that they treat everybody the same, regardless of what the color of their skin is, and then have them sent off to a Mississippi public university where they tell them that no, that we have to discriminate against some people because of the color of their skin, or no, some folks have a color of skin that's actually lesser than because of something they can't control, what they look like when they're born. I don't want to be paying for that kind of an education for my kids. And so that's why I'm going to fight it here today when I'm in this position and can talk about it.
I was having a conversation, it's somewhat related to this, but I was having a conversation recently with someone who just retired from a major airline. And they said that the FAA is growing concerned because of DEI efforts. There are some pilots that may not necessarily be up to the moment. And so they're actually putting some things in place to get people, whatever the training needs to be, or maybe even people flying with them. The ramifications of these conversations are very, very significant. And I'm just curious, we're a conservative state, I get it, but I'm just curious, as you continue to talk about this, how much do you feel a wave starting to build around? Now, why are we spending public dollars on things like this?
Yeah, I hope that's the case. I hope a wave is building. You see the wave building in other states. We'll just have to wait and see if that wave is strong enough here to result in any legislation that would actually ban the use of taxpayer dollars on these initiatives. But look, to go back to your point, Ricky, I mean, you talked about the airlines hiring on the basis of diversity as opposed to merit. And this can be a problem if you end up hiring somebody to be a pilot who's not qualified to be a pilot. I'll give you another very specific example and a very serious example. Multiple medical schools around the country, including Duke, have changed the way they evaluate candidates to go into medical school. And some of them, like Duke, have specifically gone totally away from any measures of competency or intelligence or merit because they say that it's far more important to listen to people's life story. That's their words. That's what they say they're looking at. And so if you do that, if you shut down the use of standardized tests and any definition, any measure of merit, and then you shift over to only thinking about diversity when you're bringing in a medical school class, guess what? You're going to end up with worse doctors. And if you end up with worse doctors, you're going to end up with worse healthcare for patients, us. This is the danger. This is the danger that DEI presents because it's a full move away from truth and a full move away from merit and movement in the direction of this holy grail of the left, which is diversity. And the problem with that is it's going to change our society and it's going to make outcomes for everybody worse. That's not a good thing. And we've got to be bold enough to stand up and say, no, we're not going to go along with this. You can call me whatever name you want to call me. We're just not going to go along with it.
Well, listen, when I was in the newspaper business, one of the things we focused a lot on is diversity. We wanted our newsrooms to reflect the community. That was important. That what we were writing about was important, and we wanted to reflect the communities. So your statements are not against diversity of skin or diversity of thought or any of those things. But it's the point you're making when you get to, for example, some states considering not having a law exam to be a lawyer, and you have the example you just mentioned as it relates to medical school, and the one I mentioned as it relates to flying a jet airplane full of people. That when you get away from meritocracy, again, it sounds like a fancy word, but it's just really based on merit. Can you do the work, and are you a good fit in this organization doing the work? You can still do that and have focus on hiring diverse voices, but you can't let the focus only on diverse voices keep you from some just shelving meritocracy. If there's a fine line between those two things, isn't there?
Well, this is the way I would say it. I think if you relentlessly focus on competence and merit, you're going to naturally end up with a diverse workforce. Because competence and merit comes in all shapes, forms, and sizes. I mean, in my office, in the state auditor's office, we have an incredibly diverse group of division leaders. I hired each and every single one of them because they were the best at what they do. Didn't matter to me what they look like. It didn't matter to me how old or young they were. I hired them because they were the best at what they do. And you can look at our staff picture and you can think that's an incredibly diverse group of people. Diversity of skin color or anything else did not enter into my mind when I was making those decisions. I hired based on merit. Lo and behold, not only do you end up with a diverse office when you do that, you actually end up with a more professional and competent office because you've hired the best people. And so over the course of the last 5 years, we've recovered more taxpayer money than in any other 5-year period in the history of the state. And the thanks for that goes to the team here that's doing work every single day. I help build the team, but then I get out of their way, and they performed incredibly well because they're the best at what they do. That's a
great way to say it. Merit and competency matter, and I think that's a great way to say it. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with State Auditor Shad White. We'll see you after this. Well, welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have State Auditor, Mississippi State Auditor Shad White with us. And when we went to break, we were talking about the importance of competency and merit in hiring and in building the team. And he was focused, and as an example, the diverse group of people that he has around him. What's interesting, though, is that the polarized world that we live in now, one more point about this, and we'll go to some work that you're doing as state auditor specifically, but just one other quick point about this, and that is that we live in such a polarized world that the right, the extremes of the right, the extremes of the left are constantly defining the conversation, when in fact, most people are somewhere in the middle. I mean moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans are somewhere in the middle. When they get below the headline of DEI, and start to hear the conversation you and I just had around merit and competency, we need to have that conversation more often, because the reality is that we get hung up on the talking point around it and we stop there, and we don't really truly appreciate where each other's coming from. And these are not conversations that we can just have by saying one or two sentences. It takes a lot more explanation to understand the depth of the problem and the depth of the challenge. And we live in a soundbite world, and that's kind of part of the problem, isn't it, Shad?
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think if you do just a little bit of digging into DEI, you'll very quickly realize that the principles underlying DEI are incredibly unpopular, not just to people on the right, but to folks in the middle and most folks who would call themselves moderates. It's only a very small fringe political group that loves DEI. So, for example, if you polled the question of, do you think kids should be told that whiteness is a problem, which is a sentence that repeatedly comes up in DEI trainings and initiatives, almost everybody in America is going to say, that's crazy. That's crazy. A lot of Democrats would say that's crazy. And yet we continue to fund these initiatives. If you asked everybody in America, look, do you think that we should discriminate against people because of something that happened 150 years ago? Almost everybody in America is going to say, no, that's crazy. And yet a small group of people believe in that, and they're winning the battle today because DEI initiatives still exist. If you asked everybody in America, do you think that we should just throw out all measures of merit and instead focus solely on whether or not this medical school class is diverse enough? Almost everybody in America is going to say, that's crazy. We've got to have some kind of screening for competence. when we're selecting people who are going to be doctors. But
Yeah.
there's still a small group of people who still are winning that battle because they're still controlling the medical schools, a lot of the medical schools. So I actually think we're on the winning side here, whether you're conservative or moderate or independent or whatever you're calling yourself. I think we win the battle intellectually. We just have to keep talking about it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, what happens, and we'll leave it at this, that just in terms of society, when the George Floyd incident happened and you had all of America's attention during that time, this is not atypical to have the pendulum swing way off in one direction. And then we have the pandemic hits, and there's a lot swirling, and then the growth of social media and all of that. We find ourselves in a position where, like usually is the case, the pendulum's going to come swinging back, and we're going to try to find, how do we live with this, and how do we get the focus back on what really matters, which is, as you pointed out, competency and meritocracy. So really good conversation. Hey, listen, one of the things in searching on the state's auditor's office recently is what you see is headline after headline after headline after headline of fraud and guilt of embezzlement and so on. So, just in the core work that you guys are involved in, there's no rest for the weary in your world, is there?
Not at all. Typically we have between 100 and 125 active cases at any one time. And, you can scroll down on my Twitter feed, my X feed, and you'll see that we're making about an arrest every week and a half. We'll have a guilty plea every week and a half, something like that. So, yeah, unfortunately, there's still a lot of corruption in the state of Mississippi. And we look at it in the state auditor's office, regardless of how big it is. So, we've had small, tiny cases, town clerk stealing $500, $1,000, all the way up to the biggest civil recovery in the history of the auditor's office, which happened under my time. So, we've had cases that have run the gamut between big and small, and they're not stopping, unfortunately. My goal really when I talk about these cases is to over time create a deterrent, to send the message to people that if you're out there stealing, we're going to find you eventually. And so I hope that's working. It's one of the things that is proven by research by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners to work. So I'm going to keep talking about our cases, and we're going to keep working hard here.
Well, thank you for that, and you're right. I mean, you can see it. You can just see it in the news headlines that your team is literally burning the midnight oil, and that's very obvious. And when you do that and you create a lot of attention to it, it has to be a deterrent to people. It has to make them at least think twice about whether I'm going to do this or not. Listen, I had a great conversation this week with Paige Roberts, executive director for the Jackson County Chamber. The chambers on the coast, and I think across the state, are not your father's chamber. They're involved in the traditional chamber work, but they're also involved in community building and all kinds of really important stuff. Paige actually referred to anyone who thinks that if you have a conversation with someone in Hancock County that their brother-in-law might not be on the board of supervisors in Jackson County or Hancock County to Jackson County, you may be messing up. So the point is, it's a very small world down here. It's a very small world across Mississippi. People tend to know each other, and the closer you get to your position, whether it's the political parties or whatever, 1 or 2 degrees separation from everybody. She actually referred to it as the Mayberry Network, which Jeff I thought actually was a great description of that. And I would say that anyone who doesn't get that, who burns bridges, it's not very smart. It really isn't. What I was curious about is when you make a calculus to write your book, and I went, it's coming out, I think, in August. Your book is about to, and Kyle, if you can show that photo of the book up there, we'll show it for the Facebook and YouTube audience. Mississippi Swindle. Up at the top, it says "Must Read" by Shad White, which is the Brett Favre and the welfare scandal that shocked America. When you write, it's actually in it says "Must read with all the thrills of a John Grisham novel." I've read everything he's written, so I can appreciate what that is all about. You write it, and you're still in politics, and you've got all these networks, and you're writing about current people and current positions and whatever. Is there a calculus that goes with that, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think the calculus was pretty simple. I thought that the taxpayers needed to know the truth about what happened in the welfare scandal. That was pretty much it. The welfare scandal that we uncovered back in 2020 and that has unfolded in front of the state over the course of the last 5 years has really it's really penetrated Mississippi all the way through. If you look at some of the public polling from last year, almost every Mississippian had heard of this. And yet the case is super complicated, and most normal people, including my wife and relatives who follow it every single day and hear me talk about it all the time, it can become very confusing. And what actually happened can be lost. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to write a book that summarizes what happened here, and I'm just going to tell the truth, period. And there's some folks who are going to look good in it because they ended up doing a great job, and there are some folks who are not going to look good in it because they didn't do their jobs. And that is a decision that those individuals made long before this book was written, and I thought it was important for folks to know about it. I'll tell you the other thing that really motivated me to write the book. I'm in the National Guard, and I was preparing last year for what I thought was going to be a deployment overseas. So it was looking like for a period that I was going to be deployed overseas. And part of my work in preparing was to work with a group of Special Operations Forces guys who are also going over in this deployment. And so I'm not Special Operations. I'm a JAG in the Guard. I'm a lawyer, but a lot of these units carry lawyers with them because they do a lot of complex work, and you have to do a lot of analysis of rules of engagement and legal treaties and all that sort of stuff to figure out if they can do what they want to do. So I'm training with this group. And as I was training, I realized, this group of guys, they're going over to one of the most dangerous parts of the world, and they're going to risk their lives in their jobs every single day. They're going to be knocking down doors. They're going to be riding roads that could have IEDs planted on them. They're going to be sitting in bunkers as drones go overhead from another country and attack them. They are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice in their job for what is right. And here I am, the state auditor, and I know that what is right is that the taxpayers should understand what happened with their money in this case. Am I willing to upset a few people by telling the truth? If they're going to risk that in their jobs, what am I willing to risk in my job? That's what I thought about when I made the decision to publish this book. So that really informed my instinct on it, and I think that it'll be a good read for anybody who wants to understand what happened here, so that we can prevent it from happening again.
I like your explanation. Some people are still you go into anytime the TANF funds come up, people are still confused about the role you have to file charges and all of that. So, let's help people who really want to have an open mind about this understand what the role of the auditor's office is, and then what other responsibilities exist outside of your span of control.
That's right. So to put a clear point on it, my office doesn't have the ability to charge somebody with a crime. That's a prosecutor's job. So everybody, all entities in the criminal justice process have a different responsibility. Judges have a different responsibility than juries, than prosecutors, than us. So in the state auditor's office, we're auditors, as the name might suggest. We do audits. We dig up the facts. So we'll do a criminal investigation, dig up the facts, do interviews, pour over financial documents, look at invoices, and we'll build up a case file, and hopefully we've figured out what happened in a given situation, and then we take that to a prosecutor.
Yeah, Shad, let's do it. You take it to a prosecutor. We'll pick it up right there on the other side, because we're having a conversation with State Auditor Shad White. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. We're having a terrific conversation, just kind of diving deep into a lot of stuff with State Auditor Shad White. When we went to break, we were talking about how the State Auditor's Office role is to build the evidence, and then once they do that, they hand it over to a prosecutor. The prosecutor does not work out of the State Auditor's Office. Their job is to find the problems, button it all up, and then hand it over to a prosecutor, and then it's the prosecutor's role to decide who they're going to indict and so on. What else do you want to add about that, Shad?
Yeah, that's really the biggest answer to the question I get most frequently about the welfare fraud case is, well, why haven't you gone out and arrested Steve Jones or Bob Smith or whoever it may be? And the answer is, we don't arrest anybody if they haven't been charged with a crime. And we don't get to decide who's charged with a crime. That's the role of a prosecutor. The second big question that I get after somebody thinks about or looks at the welfare scandal is they'll say, well, how do we know you investigated everything? How do we know that you did a good job? And what I say to that is, look, this is a big case. So 4 years ago, we decided to hand everything that we had over to the FBI. We allowed the FBI to work from the auditor's office for a period during COVID when their offices were shut down. We've cooperated fully with the FBI, answered every question that we can think to answer. And oh, by the way, the FBI doesn't ask for Shad's permission to do anything. They're the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They do their own investigating. And so our work, coupled with the fact that you have a completely separate investigative body who also dove into it, that means that at the end of the day, all the facts are going to be churned up. And the real question is, what are prosecutors going to decide to do with those facts at the end of the day? And really, you know, if you want to know which prosecutors we're talking about, there are three that have jurisdiction here mainly. First is the local DA here in Hinds County. The second is the Attorney General of the state of Mississippi. And the third is the U.S. Attorney, the federal U.S. Attorney, which is appointed by President Joe Biden. Those are the three prosecutors that have jurisdiction in this case to make a call on it.
So there's been some interesting chapters this year. Of course, you have the defamation suit and Lynn Fitch coming forward and saying she's not going to represent you in that. And then you've got a counterclaim that she's not involved. Did you anticipate the rub with Fitch through this process as a result of your book?
You know, I don't know if I had a thought really about what her reaction would be to the book, because in my mind, you know, the facts of the welfare scandal were really already out there. I mean, really what we're talking about is, you know, 5 years worth of work that had been covered extensively in newspapers. And I think most people saw that I had taken a leading role in investigating this, that the local DA, Jody Owens, had taken a massive role in putting a stop to this welfare fraud scheme, but that and that the federal prosecutors had very quickly joined in after that and had participated, and had cases of their own, but that was about it. And so really, I didn't know what the reaction would be to those facts, because in my mind, they were already out there.
Well, does it matter? Does it matter that Shad White and AG, Attorney General Lynn Fitch, are not on the same wavelength on this issue and maybe potentially other issues? Does it somehow keep us from seeking justice and you know, repairing Mississippi? What's the fallout from that?
It doesn't matter to me, and I hope it doesn't matter to the Attorney General's office. I mean, in my mind, we're going to keep doing good work in the auditor's office, and we're going to keep sending good cases over to the AG's office, and I hope that they will continue to look at them objectively, and they'll say, regardless of what anybody thinks about me or their personal opinions about me, I hope that they'll look at our cases objectively and say, yeah, you know what, that's a good case, we're going to prosecute it. That's my hope.
So you've got a long list of potential future Republican candidates. I would think that Lynn Fitch is on the list, and Shad's on the list, and Michael Watson's probably on the list, and the list just goes on and on. You even hear talks of some major entrepreneurs in Mississippi putting their name in the hat for governor at some point. So there's a lot of information swirling out there. And will be very interesting. What's your plans? What are you going to do?
Hadn't made a plan on announcing anything today, but I'll tell you this. You know, I got reelected last year to do this job. I'm excited about doing this job. I think we've got a lot of work left to do. I want to see this welfare case closed out. I want to continue to incorporate new technology in the auditor's office, which we're doing now, to discover even more waste, fraud, and corruption. But I'll tell you this, just thinking about the future of the state, I really have grown frustrated as auditor looking at not just the fraud and the corruption that we see, but also the waste in government. I mean, we audit Medicaid, for example, every single year, and we find folks who appear to be making too much money to even be on Medicaid, to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, and yet we're still funneling out money to pay for those folks and their health care. We did a study a few months ago, and we found that taxpayers pay over $300,000 a year to pay for the cell phones of state employees that aren't even used, cell phones that are used less than 50 minutes per month. So I get very frustrated when I think about all of the waste in government and all of the ways we could be using that money that could actually improve our lives: roads, bridges, cops, teachers' salaries, all the things that we all care about. And as auditor, I can't fix that stuff. As auditor, you're doing autopsies, but one day I think that we're going to have to find leadership and public servants in the state that will take a look at that.
Well, Mississippi school administrative spending continues to climb, some of the highest in the entire country, and that should matter to teachers. We could spend a whole show on that. So, listen, it's been a pleasure to spend some time with you, Shad. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Ricky. It's an honor.
This has been State Auditor Shad White. Listen, have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.